Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a really huge pleasure for me to introduce our artist in residence, our esteemed artist in residence, Kathleen Chalfant. And it's a particular fortune for me that it's my first year, and Kathleen is the first artist in residence that I've been directly connected with, which I consider a great honor, and I'm so happy. She's been incredibly generous with her time and talent, and I look forward to this year to spending more time together. I'm going to read some things at the risk of embarrassing Kathleen, but just to give you some context for the breadth of her work. Kathleen Chalfant earned a Tony nomination for her role in the New York premiere of Angels in America and won Drama Desk Obie Lucille Lortel and Outer Critics Circle Awards for starring in the original New York production of Wit. Along with Angels in America and Wit, Ms. Chalfant's New York stage credits include the New York premiere of Racing Demon, Nine Armenians, Dead Man's Cell Phone, Spalding Gray's Stories Left to Tell, Talking Heads, for which she won a second Obie Award, Endgame at CSC, Great Expectations at TheaterWorks, Guantanamo, Honor Bound to Defend Freedom at Culture Project, and Henry V at the Shakespeare Festival. Her film work includes Tony Gilroy's Duplicity, Yvonne Rener's Murder, Bill Condon's Kinsey, and the recently completed Isn't It Delicious, directed by Michael Kelly. There's another aspect to her work which I really want to mention, I think is going to come up a little bit tonight, and that is Kathleen's advocacy work. She has been associated with, or a board of directors, or a high-level participant in including these, Board of Directors of Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, Doctors Without Borders, New York Foundation for the Arts, Friends of the Janine Theater, Vineyard Theater, Artists in Residence, and she was the artist in residence at the Weill Cornell Medical Center, and affiliated with Artists in Action. This evening, I've asked Julie Boyd, from our very own Julie Boyd, who is a longtime friend of Ms. Chalfant's, to lead the discussion. Julie, as you know, is on our faculty, is a wonderful actress, and holds an MFA from that school up there in New Haven, which used to be the place to go. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce Julie Boyd and Kathleen Chalfant. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome, Kathleen. Thank you so much for coming and for being here with all of us today. As Pippin said, Kathleen and I have known each other for many years, and I'm just...
Julie was only 10, though.
But I'm going to just wax personal for a minute and just say that when I met Kathleen, the things that I remember about that first experience were how funny, how solid, how supportive, how generous of a person and an actress that she was, and how political. How did you get to have all of those at once? I know that all has just grown. So tell me about that journey.
Oh, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, and I'm not sure that all of those things are true, though, of course, I would like them to have been true. It was a difficult circumstance that we that we met in. So it is like many circumstances in the theater. Sometimes the ones that are hard are the ones that bond you the most closely. And Julie and I have been bonded in that way. It's like, I guess, I don't know how this is, but soldiers going through battles together, and you always recognize each other all the time, even if you don't see each other all the time. My family, I was born, I guess my interest in politics is, I'm not sure why it is, but I was born in 1945, just at the end of the Second World War, which was a particularly hopeful time in the United States, a time when I think everyone believed that we had just accomplished a great thing at enormous cost, and anything was possible. So that was the world into which I was born. I also was born into a mixed marriage. That is to say that my mother was an extremely liberal Democrat, and my father was a recovering Roosevelt Democrat who had moved somewhere to the right of Attila the Hun. So a great, there were many lunatic, and I loved my father very, very much, I have to say. And I was his only child. And I can give you an example of the kind of political thing that would happen sometimes in our house. My parents for a long time owned a boarding house that had been a small hotel that had 50 guests in it. So we lived our lives in public. It was like being a sort of low-rent Eloise, which may also be why I became an actor too. But anyway, one time, and this was in Oakland, California. Yay! Let's hear it for the East Bay. And Rachel Maddow, yes! The Oakland girls stick together. So anyway, those of you who know will understand the geography of this, and those of you who don't can look at Google. Mrs. Google will tell you. But we lived in East Oakland, which was even then a neighborhood in transition. And my dad and I we used to go to the movies in Berkeley to see fancy movies in Berkeley, foreign movies and things like that. And so my dad took me to see A Birth of a Nation. Presenting it to me as a classic of the American film, and didn't say anything else. And we went to see A Birth of the Nation, and I was obviously horrified. So we got into this huge argument. It wasn't about racism, actually. It was just about politics in general and right and left and all like that. And so we drove back from Berkeley and got into the driveway, which was this kind of weird porte cochere over this sort of faux castle, which is what this house looked like. And in we went, and there was a huge stairway that went up through the middle of it, and many of the 50 people who lived there were down in the lobby quietly watching television or doing whatever it was they were doing. And I ran up the stairs in a rage, and my father behind me saying, "I will not have my daughter be a parlor pink," which for those of you born after the fall of the Soviet Union, you might not understand. It was what it meant was to be a privileged commie. So anyway, and as you see, there's a certain amount of drama involved in all of these politics. And the first political demonstration that I remember being on was standing outside the walls of San Quentin prison, holding a sign with my mother and her best friend against the execution of Carol Chessman, who was one of those people who you would say deserved to be executed if anyone deserves to be executed. But then there's the question of, official murder. So anyway, there we were standing out there, and it was in the 1957 or 58. And the first political campaign I knew anything about was my half-brother was 14 years older, got to vote in 1952, and it was the first political campaign between Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower. And my brother was a young Democrat for Stevenson. So for our family, for 2/3 of our family, it was a tragedy that Eisenhower was the president. Now he seems like, Gandhi or something, but anyway.
And what led you to acting?
I never wanted to do anything else. From the time I wanted to do anything. Because before we had the boarding house with 50 people, we owned motel in another, in another great, in North Sacramento, California. And my brother wasn't there, so I was essentially an only child, and my grandmother lived with us, and she used to take me to the movies. My grandmother was English, and well, so my mother was English too, but she'd come when she was 3. So anyway, my grandmother took me to the movies, and my grandmother had was married 5 times, and 3 and 5 were the same person, and 1 was my grandfather. He died. She moved through the others in a variety of ways. So anyway, she was supposed to take me to the, I don't know, cowboy movies or whatever, but, she didn't always. And I remember one time we came home and I'd just been taken to see Miss Sadie Thompson, which is based on the Somerset Maugham story, Rain, with Rita Hayworth, and it was pretty hot for 1952 or 53, and 8, which is how old I was when I saw it. But anyway, I used to come home and act out the movies by myself there was lots of room in the yard, and I thought that's what I might want to do, though I did actually want to be in the cowboy movies because I love to ride horses, and I thought it would be nice to be kissed because I thought otherwise I wouldn't be. That didn't actually happen, but when you could have happened.
There's still time.
There's still time. There's still time.
Never give up.
Never give up. I was just telling these guys that on Saturday I will have been married for 45 years to the same person. So it's all I ever wanted to do, though it didn't seem a very realistic thing to do. And if it hadn't been for my brother, who was 14 years older, who was my glamorous gay brother, I don't know that I would have done it, because he took it seriously. And it was he who gave me the first idea that it was a thing that people did, because he knew people who were in the theater. And he gave me, I don't know, I guess I was 12, all his favorite books about the theater, and one of them was Act One by Moss Hart. And it was serious to him, and he was very hard on me too, I have to say. He came to see me in the first play I did on Broadway in New York. It was terrible, I have to say. It might have been better before I got into it, but it was a mid-season replacement. Peter Riegert and I made our Broadway debuts in this play together, and my brother came to see it, and he said, "That is the most embarrassing thing I have ever seen on the stage in my life." So it was a high bar. And so I did, it grew like Topsy in a way, and I was in the community theater. There was flourishing community theater in California, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 50s, and so I did that, and I was in the high school play. I played Hedda Gabler when I was 17. No clue why she would want to kill herself, but I don't get the problem, but I could play the Tarantella swell, so that was good. So I did that, and then I didn't study acting at college. I went to Stanford and I studied classical Greek. It's a long and complicated story that has to do with a boyfriend, but anyway. I got a degree in classical Greek and didn't think about the theater, though I made a lot of it was the 60s. I was in college from 1962 to 1965, so we made a lot of movies. But I'd forgotten. And then I was meant to go to graduate school, and I went away for a scandalous trip to Mexico with my now husband, though he wasn't my husband then. And we were coming back from Mexico, and I was supposed to start graduate school early, and I said, you know, I don't really want to teach Greek to prep school boys. And he, who was a prep school boy, said, I understand that, I get that. What would you like to do? And I said, I've always wanted to be an actress, because in 1965 you said actress. I've gone back to saying actress because I love the word. But anyway, and he said, why don't you do that? And I'd always been the good girl. I always did, except for going to Mexico with my boyfriend. But, you know, but I did. I left school, I left graduate school, and I got a job in San Francisco and began to study with somebody. And then I didn't do what you all have done, which is to believe that I could do it and apply for graduate school at that place in New Haven, for instance, where I probably could have gotten in because I'd done okay in classics, and it's, you know, cool to do classics and then another thing, but it didn't seem real to me. And it took a long time, but I didn't ever, ever, ever want to do anything else. And I was immensely lucky to be supported always in it by my husband and my glamorous gay brother, even though he was hard on me sometimes.
So you started with a teacher in San Francisco?
Yeah.
And when you have studied, I know you've studied again periodically.
I studied
talk about that?
I studied with a teacher, a guy named Larry Bedini, who had been at the Abbey Theater and was a great lover of the great Russians. So it was a good way to start. And then we went to live in Europe, and I had a baby, and then we lived in Spain, and then we moved to Rome, and by the sheerest luck, we lived a block and a half from the best acting teacher in Italy, a man named Alessandro Fersen, who looked like Stanislavski. He looked like a great Slavic clown, and was a wonderful teacher. And I studied with him for 2.5 years in Italian, which is something I recommend. I recommend studying in another language, because when you live in another language, you're already someone else. And it frees you in a way that you don't, it's hard to replicate in a way in your own language. And we did lots and lots and lots of plays translated into Italian. We did lots of French plays for some reason. Not so many Italian plays, actually, and Shakespeare. And we did Stanislavski, technique. And then we came back, and I finally got to New York when I was 28, which I thought was much too old, ever, to do anything ever. But I went on the day of my 28th birthday to interview with Wynne Handman, who is a great teacher, still teaching at 93 is Wynne. And for some reason or another, he took me. And so I studied with Wynne for 2.5 years. And so I was lucky. But what I didn't get to do is what you will get to do, which is to practice, to have all this community to practice with. Because as you all know, the theater is something you can't do by yourself. You need to get a whole bunch of people together in order to do it. And then you need to have somebody see it, because if they don't see it, it doesn't exist.
And what was the experience like to be in Angels at such a critical time of that, all the things that play is about?
It was, that was something that I hope that everybody, each of you gets a chance to do somehow, to be on the beginning of some astounding work of art. There were 3 of us, Ellen McLaughlin and Stephen Spinella and I, were involved with it in one way or another. They from 1987 and I from 1988. until Ellen and I left the Broadway production together in 1994. So it was 6 years of watching this play come into being, which I have to say is one of the most extraordinary artistic experiences of my life. Not only to see the play come together, but to slowly build an ensemble around which, that ended up, most of us, 5 of us, came with the play to Broadway when George Wolfe finally directed it. And that was hard for him to accept that 5 of us came with the dinner. And he did. And his 3 additions to the cast were very particular and very like George. So that it was also wonderful to see everyone's fingerprints on it through its life. That was really quite something, and different from my experience with Wit, which was another extraordinary artistic experience. But the play, all the developmental work had been done on the play by the time I saw it. An extraordinary actress on the West Coast named Liz Cole, Megan Cole, did all the developmental work, and I didn't know it until after we were going. And Liz was a friend of mine because we'd known each other before. And there is a way in which I still believe that play is Liz's play. And I was just lucky. I just landed in it in New York. And because it had an extraordinary director, Derek Anson Jones, who has since died, I think that Wit is a very good play. But what Derek did to the play was to make it extraordinary. And he was dying, and only he knew it. None of the rest of us knew it. And what he did somehow was to make that play transcendent. And he insisted upon, it's very interesting, he insisted upon the triumphant ending of the play, which is not, as you can see if you ever read it, in the written script. But he insisted, fought for it. And it was that moment that made it fly, and that now seems essential. You can't imagine doing the play without it.
So we have writers, directors, actors out there. If you were going to give advice to the directors of the kinds of things that you cherish in the rehearsal room as an actress, what might some of those things be?
The best directors make the actors feel safe, because you need to feel safe in order to be brave. And I think there's that thing that everybody always says in acting class, that it takes so long to even begin to understand, where people say, be in the moment. You say, sure, any minute it's going to happen, just wait. What does that mean exactly? How do you actually listen to someone? But finally, by dint of doing it over and over and over again, I've come to believe that the best work comes from some place of profound relaxation. And I know that sounds, and it sounds like you could never possibly get there. And there are, but it is at that, when you can feel safe and secure, to feel that you've done the work, and then just prepare for the first moment and jump off and believe it will be there. That's when the best of it comes. And the best directors get you there somehow. without you noticing. I know that there's a sort of school of directing that believes that you should frighten people into doing what it is they're supposed to do. And I actually worked under one of the most famous of those directors, who is now dead. And what he could do, and he did it all the time as a famous English director, was to produce a machine. And it didn't actually, in the end, matter who was in it. The machine worked, but somehow it wasn't alive. And it strengthened my view that frightening people into doing what they're supposed to do is not a useful technique, because people shut down. And so you have two things to think about. You have to think about whatever it is the character is frightened of, and then you have to worry that someone is going to kill you, either physically or emotionally, before you get through the day. And the best directors also make a company of whoever's in the room, which is a kind of magic trick, actually. Particularly because most of us will never have the luxury of working in a company, so mostly you meet everybody on the first day, and you set off on this adventure, which involves bringing a work of art to life in, if you're lucky, 4, if you're really lucky, 5, but probably 3 weeks, and bonding together in the most intimate way with people who are perfect strangers and doing God knows what. I mean, it depends on the play. You have to get to know some of those people really well. And it is the director's job to bond this company together. And if there's somebody, and that begins, I think, in the casting, you can tell it's a family that the director picks, and it has a personality that is like the director's personality. And of course, so there are those things. There's a director whom I loved who made us all feel so comfortable that by the time the audience came, you thought, oh, who are these nice people coming to see what we're honestly? Oh, great, come on, come and listen. It's, I think that way, people are most likely to do their best. And another thing that Derek had, the director I was talking about before, a great gift for, is knowing when to give a note. Because people need different notes at all different times, you know. And so you've all had the experience of being in the play saying, well, why are they going to do it that way? Why doesn't he just say, you know? And sometimes you can't just say, you know, it takes a while. People need to get it. Because this company, this family that you've bonded together, often there might be 6 different ways of getting there. And the best directors understand that. And it's very important that, because if you give a note at the wrong time, you risk that it will never be taken, because it will be rejected for whatever, you know, for a variety of reasons, because whoever it is, for whatever reason, is not ready to hear it. And when you're in a room with somebody who knows just what to say and when to say it, it's a beautiful thing to watch. It's like watching a beautiful sunset or something.
You know, as we get older and we hopefully learn things.
You will someday get older, Jim.
Well, what do you know now that you really would have helped you to know sooner when you were younger?
Oh, there are a couple. One of them has to do with this radical relaxation business. I really, really did believe for a long time that I had to rev myself up. That if I wasn't terrified and filled with nerves out to the ends of my fingers, that it wasn't happening. And that that I wasted a lot of time, you know, walking around the corner trying to rev myself up when the time would have been better spent looking at the text or any number of other much more useful things. I begin now to believe that I have some small gift for it. I didn't believe that for a long time. And this is a profession in which there are so many imponderables that if you don't believe in yourself, which is something different than being arrogant or unrealistic, but if you don't believe that you can do it, there isn't much reason for anyone else to believe that you can do it. And that's a hard thing, you know. We are our self-esteem is attacked in a million ways, and one of the things that we as actors need to do is to remain open and vulnerable. So there's a balance between your vulnerability and your kind of stamina. It's a job, you know. The nice thing about it's a job. It's a thing you do with your body and with your hands, and you're there. So it requires a certain amount of strength and stick-to-itiveness, and I now believe that you can almost always, if you don't panic, work your way to some acceptable performance of the thing you're doing if you go back to the text and listen to the other people. And I wish I'd known that was so. Oh, and another thing, you can't play both parts of the scene, you know? That thing where you're doing what you're doing and the other person isn't doing what you think they should be doing, and so you respond as though they were doing what you think they should be doing. It's not a successful technique, though very common. And what it looks like is that you have screwed up, and it's like there are people who can't ever remember their lines, but they're used to it. So they're perfectly secure. They're perfectly secure, and you are left floundering, trying to think of something to say. There is no defense against such people. So if you suspect that you're going to be in a play with somebody like that, learn their lines. But
theater as politics.
Well, theater is politics, always, because it's a public event. It happens, all of it happens in public, and you are making a work of art in common. You're making an understanding in common, so that the thing that you make exists here between the audience and the performers. And because it's a human endeavor, and because everybody involved is the same size and in the same room at the same time, it's also always a moral endeavor. And it's I had this experience on Friday. I went to see a production of Private Lives, and I thought that I went with my daughter, and both of us sat there, and both of us thought that it was not a successful production of Private Lives, and it was peculiarly political in the way that it failed, because Private Lives has a problem that's analogous to the problem in Merchant of Venice or The Taming of the Shrew. There's a certain misogyny in most of Noel Coward's writing. but it's a misogyny that in some odd way he's aware of and tries always to, he always gives you a place to go with it, so that the place to go for the antidote to misogyny most of the time in private lives is Amanda, because Sybil is a character with no redeeming features. And that's the trick in the play, to put the play on in such a way that you aren't overwhelmed with the playwright's mistrust of women. So much so that it's hard to laugh. There's also quite a fair amount of violence in the play. And that's a problem, and the famous line comes from that play, that women should be struck regularly like a gong. A shocking remark to make. So these are all questions that when you're going to put on the play, you have to deal with. And if you don't deal with them successfully, you make a political statement probably that you didn't mean to make. In this case, I know the director and admire the director, and I was baffled by that. So that's one way in which it's political. I've also always thought that putting on a play is the best model for making a society that I know. Because in order to put on a play, every single person involved with the production is essential to it. And I mean every single person, even sometimes, often, including the house staff, but always everybody who's on stage and everybody who painted it and everybody who built it. There is a place for every person in the community. And it involves working together as a community. It involves delayed gratification. It involves sublimating your own desires and sometimes your own well-being to the greater good. It's an extraordinary model for building society. And every single person who is on stage, as they are in a society, is responsible for the whole thing. So that the person over there who gets bored or doesn't care or has decided to subvert the action can do it. The other thing that often can happen in the making of a play, which is a profoundly political act, is that if there is a person who is a problem, there are two things you can do. One of them is counterproductive, which is to ostracize them. But they're still in the play. The other is to overwhelm them with the community, whether they want to do it or not. And it almost always works. That in the end, there's something compelling about putting on the play. And then there is the power of, theaters, all art is dangerous. That's why, one reason why one of the ways that societies try to control the populace is either to suppress art altogether, or, as our society tends to do to its detriment, and we all must fight back, marginalize it. Treat it as though it's an amenity for the privileged, or it is some extra thing that you can do after you've done all the other important things. Like learning to read, and then you say, but I have to read something. Am I supposed to read signs? So art is the essential expression of the human creature, and its purpose and what it does when it works is to tell the truth. So it's dangerous. And I've been thinking about that quite a lot in the last couple of years, because there have been two examples, one of them very close to me, well, three really, of artists who have been, who have so upset their societies that in two cases they were killed, and in one case, an entire theater, the Belarus Free Theater. I don't know if any of you remember, they were here 2 years ago, and they were here because they were in exile, because they had quietly, in that way you do, begun to criticize the government of Belarus, even though they were a state theater, and they were attacked both physically and in the press. And they were, and when they were on tour, many of them were didn't want to go back, and the government arrested their loved ones, put their children in custody, threatened them, because they were dangerous to the status quo, so dangerous that it was and it ended up making an international incident. And in the end, the Belarus Free Theater won because everybody's children got out, attention was drawn to the oppressive government in Belarus, and the plays got on. The other example of how dangerous art is was the murder last April of my friend Giuliano Mercanis, who was the artistic director of an organization called the Jenin Freedom Theater, which was a theater in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank in Palestine. And Giuliano was, we were talking before earlier with Pippin about being in the interstices, and Giuliano was in every possible his mother was an Israeli who had married a Jewish Israeli who had married a Palestinian Israeli, and his mother had moved to the Jenin refugee camp and started a theater there. Giuliano was an incredibly charismatic and kind of staggeringly handsome man who became a movie star in Israel. After the Second Intifada, he went back to, during which the Jenin Freedom Theater was destroyed, he went back to Jenin to reestablish his mother's theater for the Palestinian inhabitants of the refugee camp. It began as a children's theater and then gradually became a much more dangerous theater to everyone. No one knows who killed Giuliano because all the political players could have had a reason to kill him. He could have been killed by the Israelis because he was fighting against the occupation. He could have been killed by the most traditional Islamic people in the Jenin camp because he was this most masculine of men, this most macho of men, a great feminist. And the two of the pieces that he did involved were feminist pieces involving women being on the stage together with young women with men. So they could have done it. The Martyrs Brigade could have done it just because he was causing trouble, drawing attention, bringing people in. And when he was assassinated, there was a huge outpouring all through Palestine and all through Israel. And the theater has reestablished itself, and the graduates of the first school have just finished a tour in this country and have gone back to nobody knows what. But it's dangerous art. Dangerous. And therefore, and only dangerous because it's effective. because it makes people see. And there is an argument that another sort of way to marginalize political speech is to say, you read this all the time in reviews of plays about politics. Well, we know all that, but then you have to say, if we know all that, how come it's still going on? I don't know. They said that one of the things that brought down the Soviet Union was rock and roll. Rock and roll and samizdat theater and poetry. So don't ever, that's another thing. You know, you're always having to defend yourself from being an artist. Don't. It's a great thing to do. It's hard, and it's dangerous, and you should be proud of it. And it's probably better than selling air and destroying people's lives, which is what, you know, what has brought us to this economic pass in the country. It's not the artists who brought us here.
Would you take some questions from our students? Do we have a microphone, if you wouldn't mind passing it around? Does anybody have a question for Kathy about anything? Don't be shy.
We can talk about small things, don't have to talk about gigantic things, you know.
Hi, I'm Martin.
Hi, Martin.
So we have definitely representatives from all 3 years here. And you mentioned yourself that you didn't, at the time that you got into acting, go down the path of graduate school and etc. But what would your advice be to us, the graduating classes of 12, 13, and 14, for if you were in the situation of emerging from a graduate program in today's society and in today's political climate, what would be something that maybe you would want to do, or you would like to see today's generation do?
I actually wouldn't presume to prescribe, particularly since my generation hasn't done a very good job. It's exactly my generation on whose shoulders the ways in which we've fallen short have fall. I hope that I have great faith that the Occupy movement will move us in a more fruitful direction, so that we can move back to what is the best of the country, rather than what is the worst of it. And what is the best of it is extraordinary, and part of it has to do with actually America only exists in any important way through its culture because nobody's from here. Though I did say that once to Jeffrey Wright, and he said, "Yes, I am. Half African American and half Native American, and I've been here longer than you have." And I said, "Yes, indeed, indeed. True." But nobody's from here. We're making this country up as we go along, and it's what's so vibrant about American art at its best. And at its best, there's nobody better. What I would say to the graduates of this program is to hang on to each other, because you have a community out of which you can build whatever it is you want to build. And in the real world, it's always true that if you have two people who are equally qualified to do something, and you know one of them and you don't know the other one, you choose the one you know, not because that's some awful thing to do, but as I was saying before, there are so many imponderables that you try to minimize them in the making of a play. The other thing I'd say is believe you can do it. If you don't believe you can do it, don't do it. Find something else to do, because it's too hard and it will break your heart. But if you believe you can do it, then somehow your first job is to communicate that notion to whoever it is who is asking you to do something, and to do anything at the beginning. But if you find yourself in a circumstance where it's awful for any reason, leave. Don't stay. There's no reason to be abused or taken advantage of. And that's hard to do too. It's particularly hard for actors because there are so many of us, and you think, well, at least they hired me. So if they hit me every once in a while, it's okay, I can get over it. But
Hi, I'm Chrissy. I'm a second-year actor. You said you moved to New York when you were 28. I myself will be 29 when I leave this program, and I moved to New York specifically to attend here. For those of us, I would say especially the women amongst our program, what advice would you say you have for those of us who are closer to 30 than, say, 21? Because I've always heard that whole, oh, well, you know, the younger you move to New York, the better off you'll be, which I'll say, I'll be close to 30 again, and it's very intimidating, the thought of pouncing myself on the New York theater world upon graduation on the cusp of 30. Is there any particular advice you would say, other than just tenacity and believing that you can do it?
I think the thing about when to throw yourself has very much to do with the person. Because there are people, it's probably true that if your great gift was to be an ingenue, then it's probably not going to work out so well. But I think that that's probably not so. Because had your great gift been to be an ingenue, you would have done it. So the world, art holds a mirror up to life. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of 30-year-old women in the world and in dramatic literature and where you're going to have to make your living in the TV and the movies. So you have a whole bunch to offer because you've lived a life. You're coming into this as a grown-up. You're now trained. And so your job is to figure out what part of this world you can do best and convince people that you can do that. And the older you are, the more important it is, I think, because you don't have a lot of time to waste, to get it right. So that if someone, don't go down vain avenues, trying to be someone different from the creature that you are. I have worked really without stopping since I was 40. It's a long career, and I didn't because I wasn't. There's so much front light I can't see, but I think I'm right about this. I wasn't an ingenue either, and so I didn't miss anything. Yeah. And the other thing is, don't regret. It's not useful. It's exactly like when you go up in a play. Your only hope is to move forward, because if you try to remember the line that you forgot, you're lost. And it's the same way. You'll be on the cusp of 30, which seems impossibly young to me at 66. And you are strong and ready. And there's lots and lots and lots of work for you to do. Is that you? I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that's very helpful.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Keith. I'm a second-year actor. Ms. Chalfant, you've spoken really eloquently tonight about your passions for politics and your family background. And you mentioned earlier with Martin's question that you feel that as an actor you have to know that you can do it. And I'm wondering, as an actor myself, and as someone that would like to have a family with this career, when did you know that you could do it? And how did you find a balance between your career and your family life?
I think I was weirdly lucky from the family point of view because I didn't believe it, so I did it all the other way. I got married when I was 21. I had 2 children by the time I was 27. And I now am starting on the I now have 3 grandchildren. And I didn't really, I mean, I did work, but I didn't really start to work until I was nearly 40. I was married to someone who supported my work, and I supported his, and both of us, there was always somebody home. One or the other of us could be home. I didn't go away when my kids were little. I tried to stay at home. We were lucky because we had a little bit of money. And it makes a difference. If you have a little bit of money, use it. And if somebody offers you a little bit of money like your family, take it. Because the work you're doing is important and needs to be done and doesn't pay very well. If you want to have a family, you won't be able to support a family in the theater, almost certainly. But you can make a decent living paying for the theater by working in the movies and television. It should be possible. No, it just isn't possible to raise a family and work exclusively in the theater. Even now in resident companies. There was a time when there were resident companies and you could, and that was the purpose of the resident companies, that they established communities of artists that were meant to stay and raise their families. But it's not possible without substantial subsidies from the society, which would mean government subsidies. It's almost impossible, I would say, to make your living exclusively in the theater. And that's why I say that if there is a subsidy available, take it. You know, the society at this point doesn't, as a whole, subsidize its artists. So you have to find it where you can get it. I always think that Dick Wolf, for instance, who is, I'm sure all you know, is the executive producer of all the many Laws and Orders, should be given an honorary Tony because he, in many ways, supports the theater in New York City.
Hi, Ms. Chalfant. Thank you for being here. I'm Melissa, a third-year director, and it was lovely to hear you talk about a little bit about your activism. And so often I find that I can forget the world, especially being a grad student, and how does, if you can talk more about how your activism feeds your life as an artist, and how we can, work toward making the world a better place as an artist.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that the world goes on. And these 3 years are when you're making your life, so you can't also be expected to change the world. There'll be a lot to be done when you finish, so don't think you missed it. You didn't miss it. And I don't know. I mean, I am not a great activist in the way that there are people I admire who have given their lives to a variety of political struggles. I'm glad to be able to do my part when I can. I'm particularly happy if work comes to me that allows me both to do my part and do my work. And I think that that's always possible. And the best, the best writing for the theater can change the world. Because it touches people in some place that nothing else does. It's magical when you see it happen. And that I go back to saying that that's why it's dangerous. That's why people try to stop it when it gets too close to the bone, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Then we'll.
Okay. Hi. My name is Tanner, and I just have a question about when you, if you're in your experience, and you've shared a little bit so far about relaxation as kind of being your way in to a character. When you're in the beginning stages of working on a new person, a new character, a new role, and you feel like it's, well, at least I have sometimes felt, that it is almost impossible to tackle so many things. What have you found, if you could share with us, any ways around to get in, a side door? Not that there's one answer, but if you found anything in your experience that you could share, I would like to know them.
Well, it's very interesting that you should ask me that, because I'm just beginning to work on I'm doing a revival of Tina Howe's play Painting Churches. We start rehearsal in January, and in this case it's easier to do this if you have the luxury of knowing ahead of time that you're going to do the play. So you kind of have to trick yourself into it. But the play is always in the text. And so I just make myself read the play over and over again, and you start by saying, I'm going to read this play every day. Well, it's not. I read it today. 3 days from now, I get through the first act, and then the next day I have to read the second act. It's shorter, and it's there. And slowly, you trick yourself into the text, and begin without trying. If you have time, if you have a couple of months, it's a great thing. Not, ahead, a couple of months ahead of time. Just read it, and it sneaks up on you. And so just today, after reading the play a fair number of times, but not every day for the last 3 weeks, I started to begin to learn it, just a little bit. So I figured out how many pages there were. There's 79 pages. Figured if I learn 3 pages a day, I'll have it learned long before we start the first day of rehearsal. And I know it seems terribly mechanical, but it's great, because if you set out to learn 3 pages, which isn't so hard, and you decide you're going to really learn those 3 pages, and just give yourself 3 pages in a day, you find yourself looking very carefully. You have the luxury, because you have the whole day to do these 3 pages. You have the luxury of looking very carefully at the stage directions that everybody tells you shouldn't read, but you don't need to do them, but you should read them, because sometimes it gives you an idea of what the playwright had in mind, and you notice things like I noticed after having read the play 4 times. The 5th time I read it, I was reading in the stage directions, and they were telling the time, and it said, years ago. Oh, thought I. It wasn't in 1983. It was in... And that was an important thing to know. So I just, you can sort of gentle yourself by giving yourself a lot of time and setting very small tasks. And then you find that you can do that. And sometimes you can learn as many as 5 pages a day when you get really into it. And that's all you're doing as far as you know. Reading the play and learning the lines. And so that when you get to rehearsal, you're prepared in a kind of basic way that lets you relax. And instead of worrying about what you're saying and what you're feeling and everything, you can listen to the other person and respond to them, which is probably how you're feeling. Whatever is happening between you is probably your thing that's going on with you. And it's very helpful. And you have to, it takes a lot more discipline than it sounds like, because you think, oh, I've got 2 months, I'll just put this off for another month, you know? But you just trick yourself into it. And it's there, it's in the text. And then it's fun in rehearsal, because then you can play. Because you've got all your, you know how to do the stuff. It's like practice, it's like playing a game, you know, some game that you know how to play. But if you have all the skills, then you can play the game.
Jessica?
It was me. Hello. I'm Jessica. I'm a third-year actor. And you had spoke about how important it is to believe that you can do it so that you can then tell other people and let them know that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me of how in classes we're encouraged, of course, to play any role that we want and to try to not limit ourselves. But at the same time, in industry workshops that we do here, we're also encouraged in the context of meeting managers and agents to really know our type, to know ourselves, to know what we can play and what we would likely be cast as. And I was wondering if you could speak to that and wondering if how that's evolved for you throughout your career and how you see yourself in terms of what kind of actor you are, what kind of roles you play, or if you think it's useful to do that, and just how that's changed for you, if it has.
I think it's very useful, and it's a very good thing to know that both those things happen in the program. You should try everything. And the great thing about school is that it should be a place where you can fail. You can do something that you never imagined you can do, and sometimes you can actually do it. And there are people like our friend Austin Pendleton, who has never met a role that he couldn't do. Ever. Whatever part there is, from Romeo to Lear and everything in between, Austin will do it, and he's done it, and done it well. And you can't, nothing to do. You look at Austin and you think, oh, I don't know. Hamlet? Sure. Romeo? Sure. So the great thing about in the part of school where you get to practice doing anything is to just try it. The worst thing that can happen is you can find out that you can't do that, which is not such a bad thing to know. The thing that you might be able to do is to surprise yourself and find you can do things you never, ever, ever imagined you could do. So you set yourself a high bar in the practice failing part, which is a great part of school. I've had a peculiar career because I have been in most of my working life been a middle-class white woman, which makes me in this culture invisible, which means that I have been asked to play everything. Nobody ever, I've played people from almost every possible ethnicity and all possible genders, and many, and a variety of ages. And it's interesting to me, and it came as a surprise, it was interesting to me that I should be in the person who, according to the society, that is to say, I'm infinitely malleable. And nobody says, what is that old white lady doing playing Nobody ever says that. It's peculiar. So the trick is to make the rest of the society realize that everybody can transform, because it's the essence of the creature that you can become. Though, as I was saying before, I never was an ingenue. So my one foray into playing a 9-year-old was disastrous, and unfortunately John Simon was there to see it. You all children don't know about John Simon. Your world will be free of him. It's a terrifying man. He said it was a production of Hard Times. He said Kathleen Chalfant, an actress of unappealing aspect, is not very good in 5 parts. So sometimes other people tell you what you shouldn't be doing, but maybe he was wrong. What do I? The television and the movies and commercials, the places where you're going to make your living, are less forgiving, and they're more realistic media, so the possibilities of transforming without either vast amounts of plastic surgery or prosthetics are limited. And so it's important to use the help you can get in the media classes, in those classes, in the industry classes, to market yourself. And as you get older, which is not a problem for any of you for a long time, as you get older, there are probably things you probably shouldn't do anymore. And I, for instance, am always distressed by productions of Hedda Gabler in which the person, I did it at 17 and didn't know, so that was a mistake, but I think productions of Hedda Gabler in which people who play Hedda Gabler are 40 years old. Because if that woman got to be 40 years old in that town, she's fine. It's not a problem. So you want to think about that a little bit when you're cast. Sometimes you're an innocent bystander, and people say, "Oh, sure, you can do it," and you have to make that decision. But I think the Austin Pendleton model is one to which I aspire. He is fearless. He'll try anything and succeeds more often than not.
I'm Jeff Gonzalez, a third-year actor. Thank you for coming. With the way you work, or your process, your method, whatever you may call it, is it something that over your career has evolved and constantly changed, or was there a time earlier in your career where you sort of figured out for yourself, you know what, this is the way I work and it works for me, and it's been constant?
It's evolved quite a lot. I actually didn't, I had, because a combination of odd training, the way that my training wasn't always continuous, and a lack of confidence meant that my early process, whatever it was disastrous, actually. And it consisted a lot of my trying to manufacture emotion, because oddly, I wanted to be an actor, but I somehow had been convinced that I was a person who had no natural emotion. So I spent a lot of time trying to manufacture emotion and trying to objectify human behavior and systematize it and practice all of the exercises, which are useful as exercises. Substitution exercises and all that stuff. But no, I don't mean to disparage them because they're useful exercises. It's good to, you know, there are ways to tune yourself up. But I was always worried about the technique and whether the attempt at the substitution, for instance, was working. And so there was a layer between me and whatever it was I was doing. So that I've now come to this. I also find it quite mysterious how the thing works when it works, and increasingly mysterious the older I get. I've now come down on the side of hoping that whatever of those techniques I studied have been internalized, and being as prepared as I possibly can be so that I can play in the rehearsal process, so that I think it's essential to know the lines, because all the ways in which you are not prepared are distracting from the task at hand. If you're worried all the time about what you're supposed to say, then you can't actually say anything because you're distracted. If you are afraid that in 2 scenes coming up, you're not going to be able to cry, you will do nothing for these 2 scenes and fail to cry in the 3rd scene. So that's part of believing in yourself. But you need to know the text, know the character, find out everything you can find out about the character that's in the text. And sometimes it's useful to do outside research about periods. The way people walked is important. The way people were dressed is important because it affects the way you move, and that affects the way you are. But it's sometimes tricky outside research, because then you begin to write the play you would have written about the character rather than the work that is in front of you. But now my process, such as it is, consists of being as prepared as possible for every rehearsal and listening and trying. And the result that I would like, though I don't know how often this happens, is not to be caught at it, not to be seen doing it. Somehow it happens, and that's the mysterious part. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you go back to the great dictum of Sanford Meisner, who, when asked by one of his students, "But Mr. Meisner, I know I'm supposed to really cry, but what if I don't cry and the audience is out there?" And he said, "You turn your back and shake your shoulders." Because they didn't pay to see you not do it. So that's what technique is. You need to have a technique that when the real thing fails, the level below which you fall is acceptable and useful to your fellow actors too, because it's a group effort.
Hello, I'm Simon. I'm a second-year actor. I'm just wondering, you said earlier that you used to work in such a way that you found you revved yourself up, you would go to these sort of extremes of nervousness, and that you've in your career come to find extreme relaxation works better. I'm wondering how long did it take you to come to that realization, or in what way did that dawn on you? How did you do that?
Slow. Now, I could pretend to be the Buddha and say that it always works, couldn't I? But it doesn't always work. But I slowly came to understand that among the worst distractions was terror. And I had a kind of terrible, it came to me in a very dramatic way because I had a period of paralyzing stage fright that went on for a couple of years. And it was a couple of years during which I worked a lot. And one of the plays I did was a one-person show. So there was no, and I realized that if I didn't get over it, I would have to stop because I couldn't break through the terror to get to the character. I mean, what it felt like is as though some cold death, I guess, was coming up through the earth and grabbing me by the throat. And I couldn't think, I couldn't remember. It didn't look as bad from the outside as it felt from the inside, but it was pretty bad. And I was in therapy at the time. And I went to my therapist, who didn't deal with actors. We were in therapy for other things. But, and I explained this to her. And she said, "Oh, I see. It's a practical problem." She said, "My other practice is out by Kennedy Airport, and a lot of my patients are pilots with fear of flying." And so she said, "I see, it's kind of like that." And she said, "What you must do is not think about it." And she said, "Oh, I know that sounds easy, but it isn't. It's active, and I always thought of it as the terror coming like this across my eyes. And it's like a wound. There's always a temptation to mess with it, to see if it's still there, and then it will just kill you. So this technique involved making it go away by an act of will, enough so that you could do something else. And of course, since the something else you were trying to do was learn the play, that was a little tricky because it could make it come. But somehow it worked because it was an active thing to do. So I learned that terror was not in any way useful. And it made me hypersensitive to all the things that were distracting from the job, and I tried to figure out what I needed to do so that I could prepare for the first moment and walk out onto the stage. And it isn't a technique of relaxation so much as it is a state brought on by a combination of being prepared and being convinced that you can do it. And if those two things are true, nothing else is necessary. And being prepared involves having gone through the entire rehearsal process, knowing the text, knowing the character, knowing all the things you need to know to feel that the thing is inside you. There's a place when it's hard to, one of the places where that happens a lot is in previews, because the next part of the process that comes that you have to get inside you is the audience. Because as I was saying before, the thing you make is a thing here in the middle between you. That's the goal, to put the play inside you so that you can make it come out. And you prepare, as I said, for the first moment. And if you prepare for the first moment, then you just make believe the rest of the time. Because it's there. It's in there, and it's in there with the people you're working with. I still find it so it didn't entirely work, the therapy. Difficult to do that during the judging, which is when the critics come and all like that. And I'm still working on seeking profound relaxation during that part. I'm okay with the audience now. I like it. It's fun. I like the job. And the judging, I have to get over it somehow.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Crystal. I'm a second-year actor. One of my biggest, I guess, concerns when I leave the school is how I'm going to network and meet people. Because by nature, I'm pretty shy, and asking people for things it terrifies me. So I wondered if you had any advice for someone like me who's going out in the world, who knows, I mean, I have to know people. And I do know a couple of people, but I need to move forward from that, of course. Do you have any advice for me?
The first thing I'd say is that oddly, many, I'd say the majority of people who become actors are profoundly shy. One of the reasons we do it is because somebody else tells us what to say and where to stand. And it's much easier than real life. Indeed, real life involves these unscripted encounters, but they are essential. It's the thing that you're talking about, going into the world, meeting people, convincing both yourself and other people that you can do the job, because you have to do that in order to be able to do the job, is an important and equal part of your technique as an artist. And so if that's the hardest thing for you, you need to practice it, to understand that it's hard for you as yourself. So you can start by making a person who's slightly braver than you, a character. Not a lot braver, but a very nice, polite, serious person who's different from you. Because you are terrified and wish that everybody would just go away, like so many of us. Try to make that character. The other thing is you might, I have a friend actually who teaches, I should proselytizing for teaching, but who teaches the best audition class in the world. And her name is Kay Michael Patton. And if you can get the job in Kay's class, you can get it anywhere. If this is still a problem, you have to think of it as a technique, and a technique that you need to address. And figure out this. You can try making up a person. You can practice on the people you know that you feel safe with. And try to think of, you're not asking them for a job. What you are asking for is the opportunity to bring a gift into the world. So the world will be a better place if you're given that chance and you can do it. It's not a favor. They're not doing you a favor. They're giving you a place as an artist. And the other thing is, you're in a great place to practice networking. Here, which is a safe place, find the scariest person that you can think of, that you have some reason to talk to, then practice talking to them.
I will do that tomorrow.
Oh.
Okay.
Kathleen, we cannot thank you enough for being with us tonight.
You can do it, everybody.